The fearsome M546 armor-piercing, energetically radioactive, self-targeting ammunition for artillery, also called by soldiers Hive rounds, were probably one of the most lethal and interesting inventions that were produced in the Vietnam War. They made it possible for artillery to attack large contingents of soldiers at short and medium distances directly, being extremely devastating. A single one was capable of eradicating everything that was breathing within a 100-meter radius, making it more challenging for enemy soldiers to take defensive positions. The history of the Beehive ammunition begins in 1956. The Korean War had just ended 3 years ago. In that conflict, there were cases where the combined attacks of the infantry from various flanks and massively made the machine guns of the M46 Patton and M26 Pershing tanks not enough, and had problems reducing the infantry groups, especially when these pounced surprisingly on the tanks to try to access the crew compartments or to put explosives in them. Also, when the enemy infantry was at a considerable distance and dispersed, it was even more problematic for the tanks to face them. For the creation of the M48 Patton, the Americans decided to give better anti-personnel capabilities to the aforementioned armored vehicles, as well as to the recently incorporated recoilless rifles M40 and also the upcoming howitzers M102. The program for the development of the Beehive ammunition was entrusted to the Picatinny Arsenal, who called the development of the ammunition Beehive program. It was named that way because when opening the ammunition, it had the same appearance as an open beehive, or at least that's what the engineers who developed it said. Also, when it was fired, the thousands of mini projectiles that made it up made a very characteristic whistle that the engineers associated with bees. The ammunition was made to devastate large areas, as well as quickly eliminate enemy infantry no matter how dispersed it is. To understand how it works, we have to look inside it. As you can see, it has small projectiles. There were 8,000 fléchettes, no more than 2.5 centimeters long, and they were very sharp. These were contained within the ammunition, and when it was fired, it activated the timer of the time fuse, which was programmed taking into account the distance of the enemy. In the air, when it was time, the fuse would open the projectile, allowing the thousands of fléchettes to exit, causing a rain of lethal sharp fléchettes in the area where it was fired, reducing the enemy infantry. A single projectile could attack areas ranging from 10 meters to 100 meters in diameter. The smaller the dispersion radius, of course, the more lethal it was. It is believed that its creation was inspired by the Beehive ammunition fired by the Japanese battleship Yamato, although obviously we cannot know. The Yamato's Beehive ammunition was a projectile that launched shrapnel and fire, which was used both to shoot down planes and to attack infantry on the ground. Although it looked imposing, the American pilots, they mocked it, saying it was nothing more than a fireworks show, and although the Beehive rounds were not too useful for attacking planes in the air, they were indeed fearsome for infantry on the ground, as they could create a rain of shrapnel and incendiary material for tens of meters on the ground, which was extremely dangerous for the infantry. In tests, the American Beehive rounds turned out to have quite satisfactory results, being put into service in 1960, just in time for the Vietnam War. The dense jungles were a headache for American troops, as the Vietnamese infantry were specialists in navigating through the dense jungles without being seen and in making surprise mass attacks, especially ambushes that in most cases forced the American soldiers to retreat and call for air support. Air support to quickly finish off the infantry in the jungles launched napalm attacks which wiped out large areas along with soldiers. The area attacks were super effective and useful, so the Beehive ammunition was greatly received and accepted. Particularly the shells were incredibly good. As before the arrival of the Beehive ammunition, there were cases where the Vietnamese attacked with RPGs from wherever they could at the artillery pieces, causing many casualties, as the Vietnamese soldiers would scatter and take cover in the jungles. Shooting them with shells really didn't have enough effect to stop them quickly. The Beehive ammunition allowed the shells to attack them directly, as if they were FLAGS 80 and 8 in World War II, only this time against the infantry. Shells are generally made to fire indirectly. This allows them to attack targets at long distances, even if there are mountains or buildings obstructing the shot. As the Beehive ammunition was made to attack at short distances, the shells were aimed directly at the enemy as seen on screen, which, if you think about it, turned American artillery into huge shotguns. The Beehive ammunition not only came in handy for the shells, it also came in luxury for the tanks. Versions were made of 106 millimeters for recoilless anti-tank guns used in the M50 Ontos armored vehicles, one of the most strangely epic vehicles that the United States made, and of 90 millimeters for the M48 Patton. The tanks in Vietnam suffered many of the surprise infantry attacks where soldiers climbed onto the tanks, or worse, shot them with RPGs at point-blank range. Thanks to the Beehive rounds, this had a solution. If a group of tanks approached a jungle area where it was suspected that there were enemies, Beehive ammunition was usually fired to eliminate possible hidden enemies. Also, when there were enemies on an Allied tank, a nearby tank could fire a Beehive round over the attack tank to do what the American tankers called delousing the tank and eliminating everyone who was on the Allied tank, all thanks to the little penetration that the dart offered when it came to hard metals. The Beehive round was so useful that it ended up being adapted to the M48 Patton A3, which were the Pattons with 105mm L7 rifled British cannons, the same ones that the German Leopard ones carried, and in turn were used in the M60 and Patton. Since these also used the L-Han E7 cannon, there was also a version for the M551. Sheridan of 152mm, which being a larger Beehive round contained more darts, 10,000 to be exact. Even the Beehive round was adapted to 40mm grenades to be fired from the M79 or the later XM149 and M203 that had the same utility as the 105mm versions, but without as much technology. It basically turned infantry grenade launchers into lethal super shotguns. The most notable adaptation, definitely with the use in the infantry, also established protocols to avoid friendly fire when there were Allied troops nearby. Green flares were launched to warn about its use. Although Culmina rounds had a sweeping success in the Vietnam War, these were quickly displaced in the 70s by airburst methods that did not require special projectiles and were equally effective. So the Beehive rounds fell into oblivion. These are no longer used. However, they are a reminder of how fearsome and truly dangerous the Vietnam War was for the infantry, for both sides even. And tell me, do you think the Beehive round was a good idea? Or a bad idea, or let me know in the comments. Thank you very much for watching this video and see you in the next one. Goodbye.